Hollywood has been aggressively turning animated classics and game worlds into live action for one simple reason: these are already proven brands. Studios know people are emotionally attached to them, so the risk feels lower and the potential profit feels higher. But what they often underestimate is this: the audience doesn't just love the story, they love how that story was originally told. And when that gets changed without care, the reaction turns very quickly. So in this video, we're breaking both sides down. But first, let's look at the adaptations that created doubt, controversy, or straight-up disappointment among audiences. Let's start with Snow White, one of the most controversial recent cases. This isn't just about the film itself, it's about everything that happened around it. Before the movie even released, Rachel Zegler made several public comments about the original Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, calling parts of it outdated, and saying the new version would take a very different direction. Now, from a creative standpoint, updating a story isn't a problem, but the way it was communicated didn't sit well with audiences. It felt less like respect for a classic and more like rejection of it. On top of that, changes to key elements of the story and characters created the impression that the remake was trying to distance itself from what people originally loved. So the backlash here isn't just about people hate remakes, it's about trust. When audiences feel like the creators don't value the original, they stop trusting the adaptation before it even releases. Now take The Lion King, released in 2019. This is a completely different type of issue. The film was technically impressive and commercially successful, but still received a surprising amount of criticism. The reason comes down to one creative decision: hyper-realism. Disney chose to make the animals look almost completely real, which sounds like an upgrade on paper, but it created a major problem. In the original The Lion King, the characters had expressive faces, exaggerated emotions, and clear personality through animation. In the 2019 version, those expressions were heavily reduced because real animals don't show emotion the same way. So even though scenes were recreated almost shot for shot, they didn't feel the same. Emotional moments felt flatter, not because the story changed, but because the visual language changed. This is why many viewers said the film looked amazing but felt empty. It's a perfect example of how realism can actually take away what made the original powerful. Then there's Scooby-Doo, released in 2002, which shows a completely different kind of problem: tone confusion. The movie was created during a time when studios were experimenting with mixing live action and CGI characters, especially for family audiences. On paper, it made sense, but the execution didn't fully land. The humor leaned heavily into exaggerated, almost chaotic comedy, while the original Scooby-Doo, Where Are You?, had a much simpler and more consistent tone. At the same time, the CGI for Scooby, while acceptable at the time, didn't fully blend into the real world, which made some scenes feel unnatural. So the audience reaction wasn't extreme hate, but a kind of disconnect. People didn't feel the same charm they remembered. Over time, the movie gained some nostalgic appreciation. Now let's talk about Uncharted, released in 2022, which is a very important case because it shows how expectations shape reactions. The Uncharted games are already cinematic, with strong characters and a very defined personality for Nathan Drake. When the movie was announced, fans expected a version that matched that identity closely. Instead, the film chose to show a younger, less experienced version of the character. That decision isn't wrong on its own, but it created a gap between what fans expected and what they got. Add to that the casting choice, which didn't visually or behaviorally match the game version for many viewers, and you get mixed reactions. The key thing here is this: the movie itself is entertaining, and a lot of people, including me, enjoyed it. But for fans, it didn't feel like the same Uncharted. So the criticism comes from comparison, not necessarily from the movie being bad on its own. Now, moving to The Last Airbender, 2010, which is often used as a textbook example of a failed adaptation. The original Avatar, The Last Airbender, had multiple seasons to build characters, relationships, and emotional depth. The movie tried to compress a large portion of that story into a very limited runtime. That led to rushed pacing, where major events happened without proper build-up. Characters didn't get enough time to develop, and emotional moments didn't have the same impact. There were also criticisms about dialogue, delivery, and how certain cultural elements were handled. Now, like you said, some people still found it watchable or even enjoyable in parts. But the larger audience reaction comes from the comparison to the original. When people know how good something can be, anything less feels like a major drop. Now let's talk about Minecraft, which is one of the most unusual adaptations in this entire list. Unlike most movies, this isn't based on a fixed story or characters. Minecraft became popular because of freedom. Players create their own worlds, their own goals, and their own stories. That's exactly what makes adapting it so difficult. When the movie was announced and later released, the audience reaction was very mixed. Some people were curious and excited, but a large part of the audience felt disconnected. The main issue is that once you force a linear story onto something that was never meant to have one, it starts losing its identity. Instead of feeling like Minecraft, it begins to feel like a generic adventure with a familiar name attached to it. From my perspective, the problem isn't effort or visuals, it's direction. The movie has to decide whether it wants to be a true representation of the game's creativity or just a structured story using the brand, and that confusion is exactly why the reaction around it feels divided. Finally, Moana as a live-action remake brings up a different issue: timing. The original Moana is still recent and still widely loved. It hasn't faded from public memory, and its animation style, music, and atmosphere are still fresh. So when a live-action version is announced so soon, the audience reaction isn't excitement, it's confusion. People start asking what the remake will add that the original didn't already do better. This is a key point. Older films benefit from remakes because they can be reintroduced to a new generation. But when a film is still culturally active, a remake feels unnecessary unless it offers something genuinely new. Without that, it risks feeling like repetition instead of reinvention. When you put all of these together, a clear pattern starts to appear. These adaptations don't fail for one single reason. Sometimes it's because creators change too much. Sometimes it's because they focus on visuals over emotion. Sometimes it's because expectations are too high. And sometimes it's simply because the original version was already doing everything right. And that's where the real challenge begins. Because once you understand these mistakes, the successful adaptations start to stand out in a completely different way. You begin to notice that the difference isn't luck, it's intention, execution, and respect for the source material. One of the strongest recent examples of this is How to Train Your Dragon. The original How to Train Your Dragon was already loved for its emotion, character bonding, and world building, and the live-action approach focused on preserving those exact strengths instead of reinventing them unnecessarily. What made it stand out is how closely it followed the original structure. The same emotional beats, same character arcs, and the same tone that made people connect with Hiccup and Toothless in the first place. Instead of trying to modernize or heavily change the story, it leaned into what already worked. That decision alone is what separates it from most failed adaptations. Then there's Sonic the Hedgehog, which is probably one of the most important case studies. Initially, the movie was heading toward failure because of Sonic's design. The audience reaction was immediate and overwhelmingly negative. But instead of ignoring that, the creators actually listened. They redesigned the character to match what fans expected, and that single decision completely changed the outcome. The final result felt closer to the original games, and the movie ended up becoming a success. This shows that respecting audience feedback can directly impact whether an adaptation survives or fails. Another strong example is Pokémon Detective Pikachu. This film had a unique challenge. It needed to make Pokémon look realistic without losing their charm, and it managed to do that surprisingly well. The designs felt believable in a real-world setting, but they still kept the personality and appeal of the original characters. That balance is extremely difficult to achieve, and that's exactly why the movie was received positively. Now, look at something like One Piece. This is one of the clearest examples of how to handle a massive fan base. The original anime is huge with a very specific tone and style, and adapting that into live action is extremely risky. But what made it work is the attention to detail. The set design, the costumes, the characters, they all feel like they belong in the same world fans already knew. More importantly, the creators didn't try to tone it down too much. They embraced the weirdness, the energy, and the emotional core of the story. That's why even longtime fans accepted it. Another major success that simply can't be ignored is the Super Mario. Then there's Lilo and Stitch, which stands as a good example of how to handle a remake without losing its heart. The original story was always about loneliness, family, and connection, and the newer version keeps that emotional core intact instead of overcomplicating it. The audience response has been positive mainly because it doesn't feel like it's trying to replace the original. It feels like it's retelling it in a different format while respecting what made it special. That emotional consistency is what allows it to work where many others fail. Even adaptations like The Jungle Book worked because they understood what to update and what to preserve. It used modern technology to enhance the visuals, but it didn't lose the storytelling simplicity that made the original engaging. It felt like an upgrade, not a replacement. And when you look at all of these together, the answer becomes very simple. Adaptations don't succeed because of bigger budgets or better graphics. They succeed because they understand They understand the tone. They understand the characters, and most importantly, they understand the audience. If that connection is there, people will accept the change. If it's missing, no amount of visuals can save it. The next time that you hear about a new live-action adaptation, don't just ask what they're making. Ask one thing: do they actually understand it? Because that one answer decides everything. And if you enjoy breaking things down like this, then you already know what to do. Stick around, because the next one might just be even better.